Hi, my name is Dan Gomez, and this is Mental Health Super Omnia. Mental health above all. We identify and understand mental health issues and the paths for help. Today, we want to talk about burnout. We have two guests with us today. First, Dr. Jessi Gold, MD. Jessi is the Chief Wellness Officer for the University of Tennessee System and an Associate Professor of Psychiatry at the UT Health Science Center. She regularly presents at the United States and international conferences, has quite a number of articles and publications to her name. We also have Erika Kawamura. Erika has a doctorate in psychology, PsyD, board certified in lifestyle medicine, brings over 20 years of experience, and is part of the Equilibria psychological and consultation services leadership team. She provides therapy to adult clients to help them improve their well-being, lead more fulfilling lives, and work toward their personal goals. Jessi, I have read the book. This is my Kindle, but trust me, I have read your book. How do you feel? One Doctor's Search for Humanity in Medicine. Absolutely great story. Very easy read. Gets at some very difficult issues. The first thing I want to bring up is that even though the book was written about doctors, you know, your experiences of those around you, it equally applies to all high stress, I'll call them stoic environments: police, fire, nursing, EMT, emergency responders. So explain to our audience how doctors can see unbelievable trauma or have to see unbelievable trauma and can't visibly react. And if you can, try and compare that to some of those other professions that I just mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, I think all professions that have to hear and see hard stuff learn ways to cope with hearing and seeing hard stuff, and that gets modeled to you in training. So early on in training, you don't see other people react, and people don't talk about it, and people don't cry or have emotional reactions to seeing something really traumatic like somebody dying. And so you kind of look around, like most healthcare workers I talk to after a code or something where somebody either is resuscitated or not, and nobody says anything and nobody does anything. And what you learn from that pretty young is like, we just see this stuff and we have to figure out how to deal with it. And I'm not supposed to react and I'm not supposed to talk about it. And you almost begin to feel like if you do have reactions or you do have something like a feeling, you're somehow not able to cut it. And like, that's not what you're supposed to do to fit in with the culture of the profession or to fit in with the profession in general. And I think you see that in healthcare workers, but of course you see that in all caring professions, especially, I think therapists, frontline workers, first responders, anything where what you see is not normal to most people, but you learn ways to cope with it in order to keep seeing it and not be affected by it. I think the mantra in most of those places is that the work comes first, and almost like that's your job. You show up, the work comes first. And it's almost like a weird thing or an inappropriate thing to have a side effect reaction of an emotion to the really hard thing that you're seeing. And so I think it's just really built into the training and really built into like a hidden curriculum of sorts, but also role modeling that's just what you have to figure out if you're going to survive. And then over time, you push it down, push it down, push it down. And that's what you're left with. And you're able to do it on your own.
Are you seeing the same thing when you, with the number of clients that you've seen, Erika? Do you see people that have repressed that trauma, and how does that bubble up? How do they end up dealing with
Like, I mean, clients and things like who are like frontline workers in healthcare and all of that. Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of it, they do, there is like a time and a place where they do have to, just when you're at work, right? And I see the benefits of both because, with the, even with, our therapy profession, but also the medical profession, they always say like, you can't treat your own family member. And there's a reason for that. You have to have that boundary because you don't want to get overly emotionally involved in things. So when they do come to therapy, and I really encourage people that, they need to find an outlet, right? Yes, there's a time and a place. You need to suppress it, do your job, and not let it interfere with your job. But finding that outlet where you can process it, because otherwise, like, it's going to come out in some way or shape or form, whether it's going to affect your personal relationships, whether you start self-medicating, or you get depressed, or burnout. And then, you're just becoming a shell and you're not happy. And So it's like a way to find a way to cope, and it's not a one size fits all, as you know.
You used the phrase self-medication, and when I think about self-medication, the question really is for both of you. I typically think about alcohol, right? I'll have wine at night, or I'm a typical guy, maybe, or typical older guy. I'll have a glass of scotch, or a scotch, or what have you, whiskey. But not everybody self-medicates with alcohol. Some people do it with drugs. Do people self-medicate with social media, with playing games, video games? Like, what is encompassed in self-medicating in that withdrawal?
I mean, I think in healthcare workers, like, they probably self-medicate with a lot of the stuff you're talking about first. I mean, I think alcohol is everybody's drug of choice. And so that's still highest in our population, but in comparison to other fields, higher prescription drug use, in part because of access. And so we also self-medicate with prescription drugs, which is something that is important to note because they're pretty like potent and also pretty dangerous. And so important to know, and also just like, where are they getting them? That probably isn't in the best sort of professional interest for them either. So we see that. I mean, I think when it comes to things like gaming or gambling or some of these other sort of process addictions, I think it's possible. I don't know the numbers really well, but I think all of that stuff is a way to feel in a different way or to distract in some way too. So both are probably coping mechanisms in some capacity, but maybe not ones that anybody would suggest in a therapeutic setting. But it's sort of like, I didn't want to feel that, or I didn't want to experience that, and I feel crummy and it needs to go somewhere, and I'll just gamble because I like how it feels, or I'll just like read somebody else's really hard story because it's not mine, or whatever it is. I think that there's like a way to sort of distract from internal feelings of discomfort by doing other things that make you feel differently or blunt your feelings in the case of a lot of substances.
Right. And then there's also, people do stress eating, and I think the big thing is the numbing part, right? Like, we get, as a society, and especially in certain professions too, like, you can't feel, which is why you wrote the book, is that we're just uncomfortable with it. We just need to zone out, numb out. But with any of your quote unquote drug of choice, like, you start to isolate from your loved ones and just really withdraw, right? And but what was I going to say though? But with the numbing thing, like, what do you want? Do you have anything to say about that, of just like why we have such a hard time accepting the negative feelings or anything that's uncomfortable? Like, we're just primed to just avoid them.
I think there are lots of reasons. So there's like a cultural component that's not the healthcare culture, which is like what culture you are raised in, but also gendered culture, and sort of big emotions are complicated. Any emotions for certain genders, certain cultures and backgrounds are not acceptable. And so you learn that, and then you bring that in with you to healthcare, where then you're also compounded to have stoicism because all the leaders you see are stoic. The field was founded on stoicism. And so you kind of have this like cultural belief about what emotions mean anyway. And then you go to a different culture and it makes it even worse. I think, as an overachieving perfectionist types, the idea of emotions, let alone big emotions, run counter to that. So I think that we, at least the folks that I talk to in clinic, but also like sort of colleagues, have a fear that if you even said the real answer to how you're feeling, that it will derail your whole day, your whole everything, and you'll never be able to do what you were intending to do. And that's really all that matters, is like productivity and work and, showing up for the people you said you were going to show up for, patient wise and colleague wise. And so there's a fear that even taking a second in a clinic or with you or something to actually acknowledge a feeling could mean that it derails like everything, because you'd been pushing it down for so long, but also because they're just not comfortable with it. I think also there are good feelings and bad feelings, like there are for so many people too. Like that's not true, but I think we have like sadness and anxiety are more bad. Like sometimes being angry is more okay, and so you'll see anger expressed more readily in the sort of healthcare environment, and that's not always going to be great because it might be mistreatment, or you'll see it kind of come out in a hierarchical sort of conflict with trainees or other staff in ways that is just like utterly unacceptable, but is somehow more of the norm than like a person crying and saying like, actually, that was a hard case. Instead, it's just like an agitating case, or a I'm mad and going to take it out on you and kick the dog when I meant to kick the person or whatever, or myself, right? And so it's all sort of defense mechanism stuff. But I think that's why at least I've kind of seen it or have done it myself.
So I wanted to bring up one quick thing, and then I want to talk about gender, because you brought gender up. The one quick thing we didn't talk about in terms of self-medication are legal drugs. Marijuana is an example. Marijuana is showing up, is legal in many states, not every state, legal in many states. It's obviously available, I'm sure, in every state, one way or the other. My wife notices the Amazon packages many times will reek of marijuana. So they're probably, doing whatever they're doing in the truck. Not the UPS guy, but the Amazon guy. It's just packages just reek. She says it every single time. So I'm sure you're starting to see more and more marijuana use. But you brought up gender, and one point that you brought up in the book was that if a woman is a doctor, a woman is a police officer, firefighter, whatever, you have that built-in stoicism. You're not that you've adopted, so you're not reacting to some of the horrific things that you see, but you have additional pressure, additional stress, because you have the normal demands that women do. I mean, traditionally, they keep the home, they keep the personal relationships going, the family relationships. So there's as you point out in the book, Jessi, there's a female uneven burden that exists. Now, in my home, it's probably not nearly as bad. I mean, I produce at least 22% of the work, maybe not 50, but talk to us about the stress on women in these types of roles, given that they also have the normal cultural demands or gender demands.
Sure. I mean, I think for me, the best studies of this actually looked at like dual physician households during the pandemic, because you'd say, well, they're both in the same career. I bet you that they dealt with the pandemic similarly. And then you look at that and you see that the women physicians were more likely to decrease their hours, to take on the housework, to take on teaching the kids. And then as a result, we're much more likely to be depressed and burnt out. I think that shouldn't surprise people, but I think, when you're kind of trying to compare apples to oranges, it's a little hard to say like, oh, there's some gendered aspect of it. But if you kind of say they're both working in the same career, maybe with the same expectations, who knows who's like higher ranked or whatever, right? And you kind of say, well, it doesn't matter, like gender wise, the sort of household responsibilities, additional caregiving responsibilities tend to fall to the female partner in a traditional male-female relationship in this sense that was measured. And I think, those kind of things add to, trying to balance a lot. And a career that doesn't give you a lot of time to balance anything. I think also the emotional burden of like caregiving a parent or a child on top of caregiving in the workplace could lead to more sort of compounded emotional reactions that you're burying. I also think like there's a lot of data on how long medical training is and how long people defer having children or, trying to have kids as a result, and sort of the fertility issues that come with that, especially for folks who are in longer careers like surgery. And I think that's an important component of it too, that nobody really talks to you about when you're in training. They're not like, have you thought about what, like freezing your eggs just because you can? Like nobody's really talking to you about that stuff. And so, you get to a point where you're sort of like, 10 years out of med school, which was already 5 years or 4 years. And then you're like, that was a lot of years. And so, I think that can lead to additional stress too, because if you're like trying to balance it and try to have a kid much later in life too, it's just a lot. I think it shouldn't surprise anyone. And it's not to say that the men aren't equally, dealing with the stress of the workplace. I think it's the sort of second shift stress of the home that has an unequal impact on women.
And like, a lot of women often, especially for demanding careers like surgery or any of the above, it's like, literally they are made to feel like they have to choose, like, do I want to be a mom or do I want to, continue moving on in my career? And to compound all of that too, you had mentioned that for yourself, like, you were a high achiever, overachiever and perfectionist. So then there's like the actual tasks and demands at hand. And then now you've also got to deal with your own internal demons, which adds like another layer of stress.
Yeah, super fun, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I think it's important to say some of that stuff out loud too, because at least in what I've noticed in the like colleagues I've had or patients that I've had or trainees that I've had, a lot of the problem is people are struggling with a lot of that stuff alone. I think that probably most women have had a thought about like how long school is and the timing, but you tend not to have like places and spaces for those conversations because they feel sort of inappropriate in the workplace. I think I mentioned in the book that there was a time where a bunch of folks in residency were having kids, and like I caught myself going like, I don't want to cover for that. Like, what is this? This is unfair because, like if somebody has to be out for leave, they remake the schedules and you have to cover certain things for them because you're a resident and certain things have to be covered no matter what. And, I heard it like I was like, oh gosh, that's so bad. It almost like pits you against like them choosing to have kids in residency because you're sort of like, like I have to cover for you. Like, how dare you? Like, and it's worse than just being out for being sick or something else because it's months. Right. And so I think that, as a person who has no kids, but didn't have kids in residency, obviously, like he kind of noticing that in myself as a female who considers themselves to be a feminist, I think it was really sort of eye-opening to realize like how that sort of structure and how we do scheduling and what's required to be covered and how we back each other up in this system that we often call jeopardy, I think really sets that up to be an additional choice, right? Because if you choose to do that, maybe residency is going to be longer, but maybe also people are a little bit like annoyed.
Right. And that's like the unwritten culture too.
Yeah.
Of, like, kind of holding each other accountable. And I think you had talked about like the guilt of like, I don't want to be ostracized or I don't want to be the one that everybody hates, because I choose to do this and not following the crowd.
Yeah, we had that conversation a lot with the patient Luke in the book about taking actual time off of residency for mental health reasons, because like, so often in healthcare, like, you have to come in bleeding to be sent home. And, I think that in that sort of hierarchy of what counts, mental health doesn't, because you can't see it and you're not going to be hospitalized from it all the time, right? Like that's not going to be the limit of what most people are experiencing to then have them not be able to go to work for a day. I think burnout especially because it's sort of framed as like a side effect of work or something that everybody has, which is not really what it is. But I think that framing makes it feel like if you're experiencing anything other than actively hemorrhaging, good luck. I mean, most of my patients tell me something like, I haven't hurt anyone yet. And I'm always like, that is a terrible measurement. Like if you told a patient, like, don't worry, I didn't cut off your wrong leg. Like, I'm just like a little sad, right? Like that's like, I mean, they come in very proud of themselves that they came in before that and nobody forced them to come in. And I think that's bad because we shouldn't be getting care only when someone forces us to because of a major error, but also like that culture of sort of like your mental health, your everything, physical health doesn't count until it's so bad that it's about to hurt a patient. Like that's also a dangerous sort of scale of what counts. I mean, given that we're totally also okay working sick with a mask and an immunocompromised floor, you know, like that's hurting a patient. We're just pretending it's not or something.
Yeah, it just sounds like such a gamble, and the irony, right? Like you're caring for all these, and I guess that comes with like that traditional caregiver of like you're always putting others first, and I like to kind of throw in there, like as you were saying, like the yet, right? You haven't hurt anybody yet, but we don't want to take a gamble of when that time does happen. And so like, how do you, I guess like, how does one kind of negotiate that where it's like when almost kind of like the burnout is like the norm or the baseline, so to speak, and then until it's not okay. Right? So it's the kind of like, so if for those people, like it really does feel like that 0 to 10 feeling, even though they were already at more of like a 10 and then you fall off the cliff type of thing, right? So I guess like how does one negotiate like the culture and the system and then trying to
It's complicated. I mean, I think I didn't realize like how subtle and complicated it was until I burnt out myself, because really like my own burnout as a person who talks about burnout got to the point that I was falling asleep every day after work and not being able to like fight that in this just sort of terrible fatigue that like I was really interfering it and honestly like kind of bleeding into patient care, but I was awake and I was fine. And and I think that I, didn't name it burnout for a while either, despite knowing what that is, because I assumed it had to be something else, because of course it's too much of a something to be anything else. I have to be physically ill or something like that. And so I think the just sort of, definition of burnout as a workplace associated condition that is emotional exhaustion, point me to a healthcare worker who's not emotionally exhausted. That is depersonalization, which is exactly what we just talked about with not feeling connected to the work anyway. Like you learn that to protect yourself. And then the last one, sort of like a reduced sense of personal accomplishment, is the one that people sort of go, oh, I'm doing less. Someone said I'm doing less. And maybe that is something to notice, but it's really, really subtle in the context of a workplace that has a value of working hard anyway and like prioritizes that.
Normalized in a way.
Yeah, like, there's a study of surgeons doing the Mayo Wellbeing Index, which is like a measure of well-being. And they asked the folks in the bottom 30%, like, how do you think you did? And 70% of like 71% of them said they were at average or above average, which means that like when you look around, you're a terrible judge of where you are, right? You're in the bottom 30%, but like the guy next to you is also not sleeping. So that seems average, or the guy on this side is crying more. So you're killing it, right? So what it does though is it makes it really hard to know when something's not okay. And it also makes it so something's not okay until it's really not okay. And then if you go like, I'm not sure, I want help for this maybe, then you're like, I can't cut it. It's my fault. How did I get here anyway? And it becomes really about yourself as opposed to what the culture did to you. And so, I think for me, what I tell folks is like, we really need to pay attention to our own well-being in the equation and check on ourselves more often, because I'm not going to notice a subtle change in you, but you'll notice a subtle change in you if you actually are paying attention and not just going through the motions as like sort of the purveyor of care without getting any yourself. And so paying attention to earlier warning signs and being able to do something about it earlier is like important. Talking about some of this stuff out loud is important too. Like not being okay with everybody not being okay is also really important, right? Like a normalized culture of that isn't good. Like that means we have to change the culture. Culture change is hard, but when you're trying to navigate that, sometimes you have to be a bit of a trailblazer to say like, wait, like, of course our jobs affect us. Of course, sometimes we need a break. Of course, this is what's going on. Like we all need to kind of have some ownership of that conversation with colleagues, teammates, that sort of thing too. And providing that support and giving them the ability, leeway, et cetera, to take the time that they need to recover. So, it's a complex answer, and it's not easy to say like, oh, this is so easy to navigate. But I think a lot of it is just recognizing that it is so hard to navigate and that you have to make a conscious effort to not do that.
One of the things that I noticed in the book, Jessi, is that you made use of therapists, and in fact, I don't want to say you continuously use therapists, but I got that impression. And you switched some of them out if it didn't fit correctly into what you were looking for until you found, one that you really liked. Why did you choose to go to a therapist in the first place? Is that something, number one? Number two, is that something other people in these stoic professions or people that are experiencing burnout should be thinking about? And how does that fit in to the whole aura of I'm Superman, I'm Superwoman?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you a couple of thoughts. So I first went in college. I don't know that I had a choice as much as everybody else told me I needed to. I was quite depressed. And so, I kind of had other people telling me that I was. And so I kind of listened and went, and it wasn't a great experience. I was told I wasn't sick enough to get care on campus, which didn't register super well with me as a college student, made me pretty confused about what people were saying versus what the therapist was saying. But I did ultimately stick with it and try to find somebody. And so I did have a therapist for junior or senior year of college, kept that person on the phone for some of med school, but actually made it through med school mostly without it. And then residency kind of picked it back up because it was encouraged. A lot of mental health professions suggest that you go to therapy yourself. So from a sort of Jungian perspective, you're able to deal with your own stuff to be able to help others with theirs, and that you're not having your stuff interfere. And so, with that sort of framework, it made sense to go back and get help. And I think has made sense since. I honestly think I think it's sad that it's not encouraged like that in other professions in healthcare frontline work. I think I often frame it to patients or people that are friends or colleagues that, I think it makes me better at my job. I think without it, I wouldn't notice the ways that my job was impacting me or that I was impacting other people with stuff going on with me. And we're so concerned about how we're impacting other people that if the framework is it makes you better at helping other people and that's the only way you will go, that's also okay. I think that has been really helpful for me. I think in a field where we aren't all openly talking about this. I obviously am, but you kind of look around at colleagues and they're not you don't have a lot of people you can bounce this stuff off of, that can tolerate it. And you sure shouldn't be trauma dumping on your spouse who's not in medicine or your best friend who's not in medicine, or just because all my friends went to psychiatry training doesn't mean they're my therapists too, right? So being mindful of the fact that a neutral party, somebody who can kind of help you have a space for that, even if it's just 1 hour a month, even I think for me, I continue to go every week. My therapist, sometimes I'm remember how you said this was just the pace for the beginning and then we're still on once a week. Does that mean I need it that badly or what? And she said well, don't you find it helpful? And isn't it just a week, an hour in the week that is yours and you can spend it however you want and it's just reserved, preserved, whatever, but that's what it's for. And I think that's been a really helpful mindset for me too. Sometimes I'm I'm too busy. I have nothing to talk about. I should cancel. And then I get into some heavy thing that I didn't know was in there. And I think it's really important that we kind of reframe the role of therapy and not just mental health professions are valuing it as being better at their job. And that, sometimes it's about the fear of just taking this step the first time. Sometimes it's about not finding a good fit and being okay saying that's not a good fit and I need to go to someone else. And that took me a lot of learning too. I didn't know what a good fit was until I had a good fit. That's kind of what happens. But I still see my same therapist that I wrote about in the book despite moving almost 2 years ago.
So let's come back to that because that's a really important point. But before we carry on with that, let's talk about this concept of being able to talk to somebody in an environment where people don't talk to anybody. You're supposed to just repress it. And you talked about who you can try and talk to and trying not to dump on your spouse or what have you. But like many Americans, I've watched too much TV. I remember The Sopranos and
that's a kind of trauma.
Right? That's a kind of trauma.
Yeah.
He saw a psychiatrist or therapist and no one else knew. Yeah. Right. So is that something that that people should just be thinking about if they don't feel comfortable talking about their mental health as a policeman or as a doctor or as a nurse or what have you? It's something that you can sneak away for that 1 hour, or you can carve out and do for yourself at night or in the day or in the morning or whenever it is that you're not on. Is that something that people should be thinking about or no?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm a person who hates contributing to stigma. So first and foremost, I would say like I don't love that people won't talk about it at all, and that the culture becomes like, it's cool, just go, but don't tell anyone, because then what happens is a lot of people are going and not talking about it. And so you just get alone in that. And so I would encourage anyone who feels open and comfortable to like talk about the fact that they go more openly so that it becomes a bit more common. But if you're not there yet, there are lots of ways to consider that, right? Either an employee access plan, or even if you're a cop or like a EMT, they often have kind of free access to a source that they know is pretty good at seeing that particular profession. Having free access means it's not going through your insurance. Even if it's kind of connected to your employer, those people don't talk to your employer. That's not how that works. It's just like a benefit of the job, like going to a primary care doctor, going to your OBGYN. So, if you wouldn't talk to somebody about like the fact that you're getting tests for something else, like it makes sense that you don't want to talk about mental health either in the workplace, and that's okay. And so I think thinking about it like just another medical appointment, just another thing I have to do to take care of me, just another thing that is a side effect of the job, that like I'm just checking in on myself as acknowledging that my job can affect me, I think matters. You can pay cash sometimes too if you don't want it to go through insurance. There's all sorts of stuff like that that I see people do to kind of, hide it or do it in a way that feels comfortable to them. And I'm okay with any of that as long as you get the help you need. Though, like, obviously, first and foremost, I hope some of us stop doing that.
Okay. Now you had flipped to the concept of fit.
Yeah.
So and I've talked to people that have gone to therapists, obviously, and every once in a while I'll hear a story where there was just a terrible fit. They expressed something and the therapist went in a completely different direction, which may or may not have been appropriate, and the whole thing blew up. There's many times when things go very well. So talk to me about fit. What is a good fit? How did you know you had a good fit? How did you know it was the right person for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really complicated equation. It might look very different for like different people, but I think it all kind of boils down to safety and trust. Mm-hmm. I can tell you that on my very first appointment with this person that I still see, called a friend who's a psychiatrist, and afterwards I said, I didn't lie to her about anything. And she said, what? Like, you lie? Like, how often are you lying to your therapist? And I was like, I don't know. There's just things that I haven't wanted to talk about yet. And I didn't lie about them. I didn't like go deep into them, but I didn't lie about them. And I think the fact that I felt comfortable either in the place that I was in my life to talk more openly, but something about the way that she asked questions and cared and wanted to know and responded was right for me. Fit sometimes is as simple as like a gender or sort of like background fit, and that might be true for certain people, but it could be like type of therapy too. But I think really, really it comes down to like, can you tell the truth to that person? Can you like tell them what you've been wanting to say to everybody but haven't been able to? And like, do you trust that it's confidential, that the feedback you're going to get is supportive, that the feedback you're going to get is going to help you think more about yourself and be more introspective? I think being self-aware is and a person who's trained in mental health, sometimes it's hard for me to find a therapist because of that. But I think, being mindful of those things has always been helpful for me to know. And like all the data would say like therapy works because of the fit more than anything else. And so I think it's important that if you're going to see someone, and you're just like, ugh, her again. Or like, I just feel like there's this something off. You like talk to them about it and give them a chance if you think there's any chance that's going to be helpful. But if not, then like you do kind of have to speed date therapists to figure out which one is the right one, because like there's no way to do it otherwise. Like how you can't know from a directory if you can trust someone, like just like you can't know from online dating apps of a person's picture holding a random animal if they're actually going to be somebody that you would spend the rest of your life with, right? Like it's just not, it's not possible to do that from a profile, and it shouldn't be. Like I'm a proponent for in person for the same reason, but I do understand the need for virtual treatment and why it happens. And I don't live in the same state as my therapist anymore, so I have to do virtual. But I do love being in the room for the safety of being in the room too, and the different sort of feel that you get being in a place that's just a place and just for you and away from work and all of that stuff. But that's a whole
We can
different
kind of like
conversation.
leave it there, like don't get to leave it there. It's contained.
Yeah, which
and
is like
I'm
now
so
I do
glad
it
you
from
brought up
this
the
computer.
Sorry, go ahead.
I said, which is different because now I'm like, I'll do it from this computer. I'm like in my office, right? I have a door. I feel like nobody's hearing me or anything, but it's not like, oh, I go there. That's my space. That's where I go. And then I leave it in the space,
Right. And I'm so glad you brought the dating piece, because, it really is just about chemistry. And I would also like to add in there like that, do you feel understood? But because I get that a lot where like they've tried other people and then they just don't feel understood or whatnot. Because you can go see, I see like you can go see that the most like world-renowned person for whatever issue you're dealing with, but if the chemistry is off, it's not going to be helpful, So
Erika, you brought up the burnout that Jessi had, and I want to talk about that a little.
Yeah.
Because there's really two components, and the first thing that I want to say is that in the book, Jessi, you mentioned, I think it was the Healthy Mind study, that 60% of college students have at least one criteria for a mental health problem. And so it's interesting that it's that prevalent. The question would be, what should parents be looking for? And what should the students be thinking about? And Jessi herself had burnout, but didn't recognize it until someone said it. So what should we be looking for? Erika, perhaps you could start us off. If mental health issues are that prevalent in college, if they're that prevalent in these stoic and high burnout situations, what is it that we should be looking for ourselves and for our loved ones to make sure that they get help?
Yeah. Well, for the individual, a common thing that I often hear is like, I just don't feel like myself. That's a big one. Or like, I just don't care anymore. I don't give a crap, or like, or feeling like sometimes they're so disconnected that they don't even know what they need or what they want or how they feel. But it's just that they want to stop, but they can't because other people need me, or I need to do this. I have no choice. And they just have to keep pushing through. And I think like in your book, Jessi, you said, I'm fine. Right. And that's a big sign, but you're continuing to ignore it. What's it called? And then for other people to notice is like, big common thing is like, do they seem like themselves? Like that's the biggest takeaway, right? Like, are they acting like themselves? Are they behaving like themselves? Are they more withdrawn? Do they seem like, more irritable or angry, or, just like constantly, saying like they don't have time for hanging out, or they don't have time, or, to spend time with you, or go do fun things, and things like that.
Are those questions that you ask of the students at UT in Tennessee, Jessi? Or
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important that, all transitions are going to come with additional stress, right? Moving, getting married, all those are the highest times of like people having mental health reactions for obvious reasons. And college is no different. It's also biologically a time when a lot of mental illness comes about, just like that's what you have. It's also a time of identity development. So you're like testing boundaries, figuring it out. You might be forced to socialize in ways you haven't before. You might be testing substances. You might be testing other things. Like, it's a big testing ground. So all of those things sort of have always compounded in college. I think there's an additional component that has come post-pandemic, but also post-social media, that's around sort of like social connection, isolation, loneliness. That's a little bit different. But I think that, you know, kind of the core of this being like a problem it is just kind of the truth. And, you know, I think when I would talk to parents or think about parents, I think, you know, you just want to have an open dialogue with your kid. You want them to feel like they can call you if something's off and just talk to you about it judgment free. Like, I don't think everything is a diagnosis, right? But you also shouldn't just blow off their concern or their stress as like, oh, just suck it up, or like, you're just having a hard time because college is hard. Like, whatever, you know, things that like that are sort of the urge that you might have, just listen and support them, because even if maybe you don't understand the source of it or you didn't experience that yourself or something was different from you, like the validation of just being there for somebody and listening and being an avenue is important. I think with parents too, like regularly checking in is important too. Like, you'll notice subtle changes that way. I think, you know, the question of behavioral change is probably the most obvious thing. Like, they're not responding to your texts or calls. They're a little more irritable when you talk to them. They're not leaving their room when somebody told you that, or, some kind of social change that is more evident is something that you would say. I mean, I think emotions are going to always go like up and down. It's college, it's life, we're human. And we have to also be careful not to over pathologize feelings. But I think that like being mindful of big changes, things that are not you, are important. I think when I was depressed in college, I wore a lot of sweatpants, and I probably ate more than I did, drank more than I did, and then also like didn't go to as many classes. Like, I kind of was like, I don't have to. Like, I'm doing fine in this class. Like, I can do well on the test without being in class, and like I'd stay at home and sleep and stuff, and like things like that. Like the decision to sort of go, oh, I'm all right. Like, I don't need to be in class. Like, I'll just sleep. Like, is not great. And I think that, you know, asking about some of that is something that, from my experience, I also ask too.
So, Jessi, you used the word identity as something that you're exploring and testing limits of, and et cetera, when you're in college. And I want to expand that a little bit, because in today's environment, when I hear the word identity, many times people will associate that with, is someone, on the LGBTQ, area or what have you. But it's actually more than that. It's exploring having boyfriends or girlfriends, or sexual encounters, or how much, or the freedom, the time freedom. No one's telling me when I should study. No one's telling me when I should go eat, when I should go to sleep. So you're pushing all of those boundaries, some of which I certainly wouldn't want to talk to my parents about. Oh, hey, I'd never had sex in high school, Mom, and now I've had it 3 times. I mean, This is not something I'm going to say, right? Yeah. So what is it that the parent's supposed to say, okay, that would elicit information that would say, hey, my kid's okay? Because my mother's not going to ask me if I've had sex 3 times.
There's some parents that might, but that's a different conversation. But I think it's sort of like, I recognize that there are things that you're not going to want to tell me about what's going on day to day, but I hope that if it like gets to a point where any of that is impacting you and your motivation or you're interacting with others, that you'll talk to me and I can help you find help. Because I think that being open to the fact that you're not the solution is also important as a parent, right? Like, that sometimes they don't want to talk to you, but they want you to know that they're struggling, and that's enough, and that you're going to be there to support them. Like, I didn't really tell my parents what was wrong with me. Like, they didn't need to know that they were paying for college and I was like not going to all the classes. Like, that wasn't going to be something that they needed to know. And so I think for me, like, being mindful about just kind of like them recognizing changes in how I was talking to them or what I was talking to them about, even like tone of voice, I think was just like them saying like, listen, we're here and we love you and we notice X, Y, or Z about you. But more importantly, we want you to have an outlet for those conversations for whatever is going on with you. And if you ever want to tell me, you can, but also recognize that sometimes you won't want to, and that's okay too.
Right. Okay. I can see that. Do you agree with that, Erika? Is there anything that you want to add in terms of what parents should be asking or talking about or looking for, or even the individual? How, I wouldn't want to. There's certain things that are just very personal. I may be testing limits, but I wouldn't want to tell anybody about. Are there ways of communicating information to parents or to others so that if I need help, they can give it to me?
Are you talking about what the student should do or what the parents?
What should the student do, or what should the parent do?
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think it's that open dialogue is huge. And so and to create that dynamic, I think a lot of the biggest complaint that I often get, or I shouldn't say complaint, but what makes it really difficult to and makes them to shut down is whether it be, friend, spouse or, parents, but they do the fixer, right? Oh, well then you should do da, 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 da. They tell them what to do, and sometimes you just want to vent, or you just have to, it's normal, just deal with it, figure it out. When I was in your age, I had to do XYZ, right? But just to really be keeping an open, curious mind, and asking how do you feel, but also let them tell you what do you need, right? How can I help you, right? Even if you don't want to, I don't need to know the details if you don't want to tell me, but how can I help you to get you connected to the right resources, or what do you need right now, or
keeping that open dialogue, I think
Yeah.
that's important, so that you can listen, right?
Right.
People will say things. If you're listening, it's like, uh-oh, we gotta.
And I think the other thing that, while well-intentioned, I think feeds into that piece of not feeling in a positive mood, right? Is bad and must be fixed. So it's kind of oh, don't feel that way, or oh, well, what can we do to make you feel better, right? But no, let's first, again, well-intentioned, but it's also sending the message that, feeling angry or pissed off or overwhelmed or, sad, those are all bad feelings that I need to get rid of. So
Thank you. And Jessi, you talked about the changing roles of parents, whether flipping from a parent role to something else. We actually did an earlier podcast about a book. It was called The Parent Pivot, and it talked exactly about that wheel, the things that you have to do in order to continue to support, and then ultimately become have your child become a peer, because they're adults at some point. So it's important to know that there are people that have focused in on that specifically. There's two questions that I wanted to ask you. One is, in your book, you mentioned that 31% of nurses that leave the job cite burnout in the one study that you were talking about. What should nurses do? That's the people that leave, that they're leaving because of burnout. What should they do so that they don't burn out? What should they do so that they don't have to go through that roller coaster?
Yeah. So I'll say there's a recent study on sort of improving the nursing environment in the workplace, improving physician well-being. So I also just want to note that nurses need to be focused on for a lot of reasons, and not just because you asked that question, right? They have such an importance in the ecosystem of healthcare that actually focusing on helping them helps all of us. But, I think there's a couple things. One, if you hate your job, you're allowed to leave your job. We should say that more often. We should be talking about alternative options in workplaces. I think it's really important to question things. I think it's really important to have open conversations about what you like and don't like about your workplace in case somewhere else could be better. It's just the truth, and nobody tells you that's okay. And so I'll say that first. Then I'll say that changing the environment that causes burnout is complex because it is the system causing it. So we need people focusing on system solutions. So that's going to be scheduling. That's going to be how much time you spend in the EMR. It's going to be how safe is your workplace. It's going to be all of that. And that's a system problem. And that's why people are in roles in hospitals where they are trying to figure this out, because that's where they can like put their hat. And an individual nurse on an individual unit cannot do that. As a human who is an individual person on a unit, what you can do is try to figure out ways to survive the now, even if the now might mean that you still like want to leave it later. I think learning skills and tools that will help you, everything from like actually going to therapy, like we talked about, but simply like trying to find places for meaning in your workplace is a really important impact on burnout. Like meaning and social support are the biggest like preventative measures, and all meaning means is like, how do you find like what gets you out of bed in the morning? Most of the time for nurses, it's not charting. So finding ways to add in your day, support in your day, the things that give you meaning, trying to find what that even is really important to stay grounded in. And social support means like, how are we taking care of other people? How are you making other people feel valued? If you're in charge of a team, what are you doing to foster an environment where people work hard because they're used to working hard and they signed up to work hard, but they want to be appreciated for it? Mm-hmm. How do you support that? And so that's where I see the sort of change and ability as an individual nurse on an individual unit to take control of that. It's not to say that like that other stuff isn't important. Ooh, it's so important. And we need to spend even more time on that than other things. But as a human where you have control is really important. And I think noticing that and finding those spaces is also important. That could be flexibility. That could be taking your vacations, right? So some of that is true too. But being just mindful that like, you don't have control over the electronic medical record. Probably you might have a source of giving feedback to that, but spending all day being mad at it and wishing it went away is probably not going to solve your burnout either.
And I like to, and I'm so glad you brought the meeting piece, because I like to also add in there of like most people in the helping profession or the first responders, you know, whatever high stress, they went in there because they wanted to help people. They wanted to take care of people. So kind of like going back to that why and finding like that sense of purpose, and kind of naming that as well, like throughout your day of like, you know, identifying like, what did go well today? What kind of impact did I have, you know, along those like sets of like purposes and values. So yeah, important. Just wanted to add that too. Yeah.
One more question. If you have one piece of advice for anybody that's in a high stress environment, whether it's a doctor or a nurse or fire or police, or frankly, you're a Wall Street trader or you're day trading or you're in whatever your job is, and it's a high stress job, what's the one piece of advice you would want to give somebody?
It's not your fault that your job affects you. You chose a job that should affect you. Now what? Right. So I think that we've approached it like a shock or a surprise when it happens. And instead, it's really an inevitability. And when you think about it like that, you're better able to prepare and prevent it from happening. But you're also much kinder to yourself when it does. Because just because I know I burnt out and I know what it feels like in me doesn't mean I'm never going to burn out again. That'd be nice. But it's just like, sometimes there are times when like sort of the systems are at play to cause that. But now I don't go like, how did that happen? How dare I? What's wrong with me? I go, well, this is what I did this week or this month or whatever. Of course that affected me. Now what? And I think that that's been a really subtle but important mind shift for me. And I think if I could say anything to anybody who's a cop, a frontline worker, a parent, a caregiver, a healthcare worker, like I would say, like, duh, your job affects you and what you're doing affects you. Now what?
Or managing expectations.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I'd like to give each of you a minute to summarize what's important, what you know you're drawing out of the discussion, or maybe even something that we hadn't discussed, but you want to make sure gets brought up. Erika, we're going to go with you first, and Jessi, I'll give you the last word. So Erika, summarize for us.
Yeah, so thank you so much for joining us today, Jessi. This was great. And I think the biggest takeaway is like, stop ignoring your internal signs, right? Like when you're exhausted, when you're finding yourself saying, I'm fine, white knuckling it through, yes, we've all got those finals week, we've all got those crazy deadline weeks, but it's got to be sustainable. So I think, the crux of your book is like, how do you feel? So kind of checking in with yourself, because a lot of this is just avoidance and pushing away, and then it will all come back. So I like to have people like always check in with themselves, like, throughout the day, or even once a day at the end, like how do you feel emotionally? How do you feel physically? How do you feel energy level? And what do you need? And for those people that are on that spectrum of like, I'm fine until you're not, I like to say, well, what does like a 5 out of 10 look like for you? How do you start feeling, thinking, acting, and what does a 7 to 8 look like? And what does a 10 look like? And then those become their personal warning signs. Like, I think for you, Jessi, you were saying, I start to get pissed off, right? Those are my warning signs, right? And then listening to that, like finding some ways to set boundaries, like saying no, I love like everything's a priority. Okay, well, what is actual priority for today? And kind of, or asking yourself, like, before you say yes, like, how are you going to feel afterwards? Are you going to feel resentful and you're going to fester on that? Or are you going to feel like, no, I know I added one more thing on my plate, but it's something I feel good about. It's something that's rewarding, and it was my choice to do it. So, and then finally, just taking little mini breaks, even if you've got that go job, like taking like 10 seconds to take a few deep breaths, decreasing that fight or flight, like if you're going to have to take a shower anyway, right? Like, why are you all tensed up? Just use that time to relax, practice some mindfulness, slowing down, because is it going to take up any like more of your time if you're going to go through that process in a tense state, or in a not so tense state? Like, it's still going to take up the same amount of time. So it's a mindset shift. So yeah.
Good advice. Jessi.
I don't know. I mean, I think any conversation I have about this in different environments just leads me to realize like how many different fields are struggling with this, and how important the conversation is, and how I just feel like, in terms of meaning and purpose, I leave always kind of feeling like inspired to have more of the conversations and keep talking about it, and not pretending like it's secret and behind closed doors all the time. And so I'm just appreciative that you asked, that you read the book, that you care about this topic, because I think it's sometimes hard for people to see how something like that affects them in their fields, or, doctors. I'm not a doctor, so what does that have to do with me? Well, all of us are caregivers. All of us see doctors. All of us don't want the doctor we like the most to leave their job, right? So kind of just keeping in mind that like we're all humans struggling with the world, and like maybe thank a person for the hard work they're doing sometimes, or maybe recognize that they're having a bad day and it's not about you, or whatever it is that you need to kind of do to figure out how this conversation includes you in the ecosystem, I think is important for people to kind of pause and recognize and acknowledge out loud.
Cool. Well, we're going to look forward to your next book, and would obviously like to have you back.
Thank you. In like 4 years, when I decided that I'll write another one.
Exactly. Let me say that our sponsor today is Equilibria Psychological and Consultation Services. It's an insurance-based provider whose mission is to help individuals achieve their personal potential and long-term growth by compassionately and respectfully helping clients live in balance. Visit equilibriapcs.com, equilibriapcs.com. You can look for them on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. You can also look for me on Instagram, Daniel J. Gomez 24, and on LinkedIn. Now for the disclaimer. I am not a medical professional, and I am not providing medical advice. The opinion of our speakers is solely their own. This podcast is copyrighted and cannot be reproduced without the express written consent of EPCS Management, LLC.